Hello, everyone. We're just going to take about 60 seconds to allow people to join, and then we will get started. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Megan Williams, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Medical Scientist Training Program, or the MD PhD Dual Degree Program at Vanderbilt University. And I'm excited to moderate today's session on combined degree programs. Before we get started, I had a couple of quick reminders I wanted to share. One is that the presentation is being recorded and it will be available to watch on demand in the FLAIR platform approximately 24 hours from now. So if you missed something or joined a little bit late or have to leave early, that recording will still be available. We'll also be addressing questions from the audience at the end. If you want to submit questions, you can use that Q&A box at the bottom and submit questions at any point throughout the presentation, and then we'll gather those questions and answer them after our panelists each say a few words about their programs that they'll be discussing. Today, we're going to hear from three speakers about three common combined degree pathways. We'll learn about the BS-MD program, we'll learn a bit about the MD-MPH program, and then finally we'll learn about the MD-PhD dual degree program. Although every program is different and all institutions might offer the programs differently, we will cover some common characteristics of these program types and offer some things for you to think about as you decide if these programs might be the right fit for you. Let's start things off first by hearing from Ms. Doressa Hope, the Assistant Director of Medical Admissions at the University of Florida College of Medicine.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today and allow me to talk to you a little bit about our BS-MD combined degree program. I am going to give you a little bit of high-level information today, of course, and at the end will be my contact information should you have any additional questions. As indicated, my name is Doressa Hope. I am the Assistant Director for both MD admissions as well as for our BS-MD combined degree program. You may advance the slide. So first and foremost, I want to note that our program, our BS-MD program, is a 7-year combined program. It is formally known as the Medical Honors Program. So if you're looking for a BS-MD program at the University of Florida, you'd actually search for Medical Honors to learn more information about it. This is a 2+1+4 year structured program. And so what that means is that you will complete 2 years of undergrad. This is by years attended and not credits earned. You will do 1 year in the medical honors program. This is technically your junior year. And then you do 4 years of medical school. And so the way that this works is that essentially your first year of medical school will also be your final year of your undergraduate studies. So typically at the end of the first year of medical school, our MHP candidates are also graduating with their undergraduate degree. Successful completion of the MHP year does mean an early admission into U of Com with no MCAT required. Before highlighting some of the attributes of our program, I do want to first point out our cohort, our current cohort of MHP students. And then I think that will kind of help highlight some of the attributes of this program. And so first and foremost, it is a seminar-based curriculum that is taught directly by U of Com faculty. Very different than what you may experience in undergrad. You'll notice that in the picture above, there's only about 10 students. These classes are very small. These students actually by the end of the year have actually formed a very small family within the entire UF College of Medicine family. These students are able to gain early exposure to clinical practices via UF-Con facilities. They are doing patient presentations, they're learning patient presentations, excuse me. They are working with simulated patients, and they are really getting hands-on experience before ever formally transitioning into medical school. This group of students receive ongoing professional development opportunities. Just last week, we do what's called a lunch and learn that happens monthly. And so we meet with other alumni who represent many attributes and many parts of our program in many different departments, excuse me, at UF and beyond. These students have the opportunity to have lunch with them, to ask questions, and they just developed a lot of renowned faculty members who may be physicians or scientists or both. One of the biggest myths that we have is that you actually have to be a University of Florida student in order to achieve admissions into the program. That is simply not true. We actually do accept students from a variety of different institutions. In this cohort above, we do have an applicant who joined us from Penn State University. And so we do welcome outside applicants who are outside of UF to apply to the program. We think that it only strengthens the cohort and the diversity within. You may advance the slide. Just kind of about, just as you would with any pathway into medical school, we empower students to really decide if a combined BS-MD program is right for them. While there are a lot of benefits, there are some things that we do hope you will consider. First and foremost, excuse me, for our medical honors program, we do have 3 distinct pillars that we are looking for. And these are students who are interested in research, who have a very servant heart, as well as who want to acquire leadership skills. Many of our students, as you'll learn in a slide that will be advanced, is that many of our students do end up in leadership positions within medicine. And so some things to consider about the program. It is at an accelerated pace. What that means is that the year that you would typically spend as your senior year is your first year of medical school. And so what you have to think about is that you are missing an opportunity in undergrad. Some students use their senior year to do things like study abroad, explore classes that are maybe outside of the science field. And so those are some things that you have to consider. Again, it is a seminar-based learning, which is full of discussion, full of reflection. Is this type of sort of learning experience one that you identify with? Students who are in this program, they are prepared specifically for transition into the University of Florida College of Medicine. And so what that means is that if you are admitted to this program, you are essentially committed to coming to the University of Florida. Professionalism and maturity is also another thing to consider. What many of our applicants are experiencing is that they are the youngest students that actually matriculate into our med school class. And so they are the youngest. And now it has become a trend that students are actually taking growth years before starting medical school. And so you do have to determine if this advanced pathway is something that's right for you. The one thing that we want you to know that it is solely your decision. So what may work for one of your peers, one of your siblings may not work directly for you. We do encourage you to be self-reflective and understanding how this decision will impact you. But if this is something that appeals to you, I do have a few characteristics of applicants who seem to be most successful in the admissions process. These applicants tend, again, to be self-aware, self-reflective, and intellectually curious. They can showcase being intellectually curious in a number of different ways. Some of them have outside interests, such as IT. Some of them have a deep dive into research. Self-aware and self-reflective. One thing that my dean often says is that he wants his young colleagues to begin thinking in the lens of future physicians way before they ever set foot into medical school. Students in this program, we of course want to see that they are humanistic and other-centeredness. Again, service will be a required sort of endeavor throughout your MHP year and even as you go into medical school. And so we want to see that students are naturally aligned in this way. Of course, we want to understand your why to medicine. Why are you interested in pursuing a profession in medicine, and kind of have that supported by your experiences, both lived and acquired. And so some students may have personal experiences with medicine. Some students will go out and seek these experiences. Both are equally supported and accepted into this program. And then finally, a strong application is reflective of who you are. And so we always tell applicants to please be yourself, but tell us what makes you unique. You may certainly advance the slide. And so this last slide is just going to give you a little bit of information about where some of our current MHP students are. And so I just kind of highlighted a few stats. As I noted, leadership is a really big endeavor into the medical honors program. And so I will note that 5 out of 10 of our transition alums now serve on the executive board in their first year medical school class. So these are students who were in the last cohort of MHP, and they've now matriculated to their first year med students. 2 out of 10 of them were runners-ups for both class president and vice president. 10 out of 10 U of Com graduates. So this means they were in the program about 4 years ago, and they just completed their medical studies. They all matched in top residency choices and competitive specialties throughout the nation. And of course, as mentioned, we have a plethora of renowned leaders with servant hearts who are in spaces around the globe and throughout the nation. And so that's what it means to become a part of this cohort. I'd also just quickly like to point out that the University of Florida College of Medicine offers additional combined degree opportunities. Some of them are listed below. Some things to highlight regarding combined degree programs is that we do have a flexible structure. Some students know upfront if they wanted to do, if a combined degree program is right for them. Others figure that out while they're in medical school, and either approach is okay. Our faculty certainly support and provide unlimited resources. We've had students complete combined degree programs both in the University of Florida, so exploring maybe a master's or a master's in public health at the University of Florida. Some of our med students even went out to other programs outside of the University of Florida to complete their combined degree. If any of these things, again, appeal to you, I welcome you and encourage you to stay connected with us. I've listed some of our websites as well as some of our email addresses. There is an email address that is specifically for our medical honors students. It's called mhpambassadors@gmail.com. If you have any specific questions that are directed specifically to maybe the student experience, I encourage you to reach out to that email address, as they're always excited to hear from you, as myself and my entire team here at the University of Florida College of Medicine. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Next, we'll move on and we'll have our second panelist who will speak, Dr. Rosie Frasso, who will speak a bit about the MD MPH dual degree program at Thomas Jefferson University.
Hi, thank you. I'm excited to be here and talk about dual training in public health and medicine. And I'll confess up front that while I'm exceedingly proud of the dual degree program at Thomas Jefferson, I really want to make sure that you're encouraged to seek public health training at any point during your clinical journey. I'm a firm believer that the more people with public health training in the health system, the better off we'll all be. Public health training gives you magic glasses to look at your patients in new and different ways and really consider many things outside the scope of their clinical presentation that impact their health and well-being. So next. So at Thomas Jefferson University, we have what we call a timeout or step out program. If you're interested in getting an MPH while getting an MD, you can apply to Thomas Jefferson as a dual degree student, or once you're here in the medical school, you can decide that you want to step out of med school for a year and come hang out with us. Many students from Thomas Jefferson seek this opportunity out, and we're really proud of the students that come from our own institution to get the MPH. But we also have students that come to Thomas Jefferson because they want to spend some time in Philadelphia. They want to be in a College of Population Health. They want to look at that intersection of public health and medicine with that lens in place. So we have medical students from a variety of medical schools, usually 6 or 7 different ones every year, coming to Thomas Jefferson to hang out for a year and get an MD and an MPH. We work with the individual and their home medical school to make that happen. A combined degree is becoming increasingly common. Many students are taking an extra year to finish medical school for lots of reasons. Some of them include you build a whole new skill set. You know, you've spent 3 years, or most people do it between year 3 and year 4, but there is flexibility. But you've spent 3 years honing in those clinical skills, and now you want this complementary skill set, perhaps around healthcare quality and safety, or around research and advocacy. So it gives you also a chance to like regroup and refocus and think about what the next path will be for you. A lot of our students come to the MPH year really having decided what they're going to apply to for residency, but want that extra time to explore that discipline from the research side. So what we do for our joint degree students is we match them with mentors in their intended residency path. So if they plan to apply to OB during their MPH year, they're working with people in OB that do public health research, and they're getting those skills during that year. Many students are interested in advocacy work, so they spend the year honing those skills, but with sort of an eye towards where they plan to go for residency. You make wonderful new connections, especially because our program is so diverse in terms of the medical students that come see us and come spend time with us from a variety of institutions. And you're more competitive during the match with this additional sort of skill set. We've been interviewing students who graduate from the dual degree program for about 5 years, and 100% of our interviewees say that the program directors that interviewed them for the match asked them a lot of questions about what they accomplished during their MPH year, and they were able to provide real strong examples of their interest in their field of choice and how they would bring additional skills to the table. So we're really proud of the fact that we're sending people off to residency with this extra skill set that makes them more competitive. There's always some cons, right? If you do a dual degree, either with us or anywhere, you're spending an extra year for the most part in medicine. There are a few programs around the country where the MPH is layered over medical school and you're not adding additional time. But for the most part, there is a time cost to doing dual training. You won't graduate with your cohort necessarily because you've stepped behind a year. And of course, there's some time, money, and delayed residency. So those are the things to think about for sure when you're making this decision. I think the benefits are tenfold and will last a long time. And your careers are long. I'm pretty convinced that having this dual training really is protective against burnout because you can pivot professionally. You can wear your clinical hat and do that work, but you can also spend some time in the research or advocacy space. So it provides you a little variety in your career trajectory. You can go to the next slide. At Jefferson, we're very committed to responding to the students' needs. So we meet with the MD and PhD students very often. We run a seminar series that goes alongside the curriculum. So every other Tuesday, we bring people in who have MDs and MPHs from a variety of disciplines and fields, and they come meet with our students to talk about how to leverage dual training, how they've deployed it in their career, how one can leverage that training to make the difference in the world that you want to make. And that seminar series came from student feedback. So I love this picture of a flyer. First of all, this particular student is a man. She's a pediatric resident now at Duke. But I work with the students to refine like how we even market the program. So they scratched up our flyer and they talked about the things that really mattered to them that they got out of training. They talked about being able to initiate and run their independent research project, do things that were creative, that gave them more time to explore things that are tangential to the clinical world, but really important to the health and well-being of their future patients. They get involved in research, and if that's your goal, there's lots of opportunity to do research. In this particular picture in the lower corner, this is a resident who is planning to apply to internal medicine, and we gotten him involved in a project looking in that space and working with an internal medicine doc to kind of move that forward and publish a paper. Above in the top is someone who is applying to surgery, and his MPH thesis project was around surgical disparities and outcomes, and he matched in surgery at Brown. He's at Brown. And then the woman getting the award in the center there is an internal medicine resident out in California, and she's receiving, in this picture, the United States Public Health Service Award for her commitment to promoting health among youth. So her thesis project focused on vaping and how these commercial determinants of health are impacting people in communities. So you can go around and do the work you're going to do with your clinical hat on, but really important to think about what's happening around you and around your patients. So commercial determinants of health are really important to consider, and her work did a great job at focusing on that. You can go to the next slide. So why do an MPH during medical school? A lot of people ask this question, like, can I do it during residency? Can I find some kind of path that'll support it? And there's no bad time to do an MPH, but the folks, every time we interview people about it, they all say they wish they had done it sooner. So when we interview, we have several attendings in our program, mid-career professionals that are doing an MPH, and they all say they wish they had done it during residency. They would have approached their career differently. They would ask different research questions. They would engage differently in the work they want to do. But anyway, during your medical school year, it does give you a little time to breathe. It gives you a little time to step away from that clinical treadmill and think about your career in a broad way, and allows you to hone in on skills that you don't have time to garner while you're in medical school. So we're excited about those opportunities. And we also provide you a chance to think about how to collaborate with people in and out of medicine, lawmakers, policy experts, leaders, and administrators. They're going to be your colleagues the rest of your career, and they're going to be the levers you need to pull professionally. And MPH training gives you a chance to do that. Our students in the MD MPH program publish in peer-reviewed journals, but we also push them to enter the lay sphere, like to do op-eds and to provide ways in which they can reach out to the community to leverage what they know and what they've learned in that scientific space to move the needle and change policy. You can go to the next one. So if you would like any more information about the dual degree program at Jefferson, again, is a destination program for wherever medical school you land, or if you're thinking about Jefferson as your medical school of choice, you can always reach out to me. So thanks for your attention.
All right, thank you, Dr. Frasso. Next, we'll have our final panelist, Dr. Ali Zarinpar, who will discuss dual degree MD PhD programs.
Great, thank you. So I'm not going to talk about our program in particular, but I'm going to talk about MD PhD programs in general. And really the question a lot of people come with is, do I really need to do one or the other? Is the combined program the right program for me? And this is a slide deck that the AAMC has kind of put together to answer some of those questions. So next slide. So what really is the difference between physician scientists and physicians? Well, in general, we think of physicians as the practitioners of medicine. So they use biomedical knowledge to help individual patients. And when we talk about physician scientists, they're really doing the advancement of the biomedical knowledge through research. And that research could be any sort of broad categories of research. But to get there, you really have to get trained to do one or the other or both. So what do medical schools do? They prepare people to be physicians, but they also prepare people to be lifelong learners to help diagnose and treat patients. Graduate school is different. Graduate school trains people to perform research and to do that in a rigorous and hypothesis-driven manner. Physician scientists aren't doctors on one day and researchers on another, but rather they're the bridge, really the connection. They're both. They're not one or the other, they're both. And there's something a little bit different. They're really the bridge between the scientific research and the clinical patient care. Next slide. Next slide, please. Great. So it's really this intersection. And the physician scientist pipeline is really so important to society at large, but also the government and the institutions that you're training at, that they're investing in your education. And in fact, they would pay students to do the combined degree programs. They'll pay for tuition and the benefits. So next slide, please. And I think really it's the whole spectrum, and physician scientists span the entire spectrum. Some are much more on the research side with regard to doing basic translational research, and their effort reflects that. And then others are much more on the patient-oriented side, the clinical side, and their research also reflects their patient-oriented and or epidemiological research. And we talked about MPH a little bit earlier. I think that certainly will be relevant to that as well. Next slide, please. So how does the training work? And you can actually click through so all the arrows come up, so we don't have to go through. Yeah, perfect. So how does the training differ? So MDs, after college, they go to medical school for 4 years, they get their medical school degree, and then they do a residency program, whether, it could be up to 7, 8, 9 years, plus some sort of, post-residency work. Now, if you go into, the clinical work, then you do a fellowship or you go straight into practice. But if you want to become a physician scientist, what you do is get some more research training. And if you get to it from doing an MD route, what people do is some sort of combined fellowship with a postdoctoral fellowship, so clinical fellowship plus a postdoctoral fellowship, or some sort of research fellowship. So they do more research training at that point. Or the people who do the MD PhD program, they get a PhD and an MD together in a structured program. Then they go on into a residency and a postdoctoral fellowship there. Everyone ends up at, both these pathways end up as physician scientists. And in fact, basically half of people with of MDs with NIH funding are, MD PhDs, but they constitute really a small fraction of medical school graduates, right? So, a lot of MD PhDs, they go into research, they get NIH funding to do research. They're a very small fraction of the medical school graduates. Next slide, please. So nationwide, there are about 100 MD PhD programs. They all have their specific different kinds of training. In almost every state, there's an MD PhD training opportunity. And about 50 of them are funded by the National Institutes of Health, specifically by National Institute of General Medical Sciences, to train students within what's called a medical scientist training program. So these are called MSTPs. MD PhD, MSTP. MSTP is just means an MD PhD program that's supported by this grant. There are MD PhD programs that are not NIH funded by MSTPs. So as MSTPs, but you have to, when you look at individual programs, you'll have to ask whether they're MSTP or not, or where their funding comes from if it matters. But really, what it means is that you have to figure out, most MD PhD programs offer financial support, whether it's just tuition waivers and health insurance or stipends on top. And they're all kind of different, so you have to figure it out at the individual programs. Next slide. So what's the goal here? The goal is to prepare trainees for a career that combines research and clinical care, but here the emphasis is on the research. So what you see in that first 2 years, it's basically medical school. MD PhD program, by and large, don't do much in terms of research training other than a few classes or some sort of integration programs within the first 2 years, because there's a lot to be learned on clinical medicine the first 2 years. Then when the rest of the med school cohort moves on to their 3rd and 4th year clinically, the MD PhD crew is spending their time doing their PhD in graduate school. And that is a variable number of years. Some places 3, 4, 5, depending on how long it takes to do your PhD. In general, on average these days, it's anywhere between 3 to 5 years of PhD. And then after the PhD work, go back to medical school, do the clinical rotations in the last 2 years of medical school, with, again, some research built in, depending on which program. There are many PhD fields possible. There are sort of, the way that it had initially started, or it was people doing, pretty basic translational work, genetics, biochemistry, cell biology, things that are what you think of when you think of, physician scientists. But as people's interests have diversified, there are people doing PhDs in math or epidemiology or public health or biophysics. It really runs the gamut. I think as long as you can make an argument for how that PhD would be relevant to you becoming a physician scientist, I think the programs would be very open to that. Next slide. And what happens to these folks after they finish their MD PhD? They choose any kind of variety of residency training. By and large, the majority have been going into internal medicine, pediatrics, pathology, or neurology. Those have been the classic routes, but increasingly MD PhD students are going into surgical fields as well as other interventional fields. MD PhD alumni do research more than half of their time. They love what they do, and more than 80% of them would do it again. Next slide. So where do people end up? They mostly end up in academic medicine. Some of them end up in federal agencies, whether it's the NIH or other federal agency like the FDA or CDC. Some of them go into private practice. Some of them go into industry as, in pharma or biotech. Some of them go into law. Again, depends on where their interests are and how their interests have evolved. With regard to folks who do specific types of research, again, mostly it's basic science and translational. Some of them go into what we call patient-oriented or clinical research or health services. Next slide. And I think that's it for me. There are a whole bunch of Q&As, and I do want to, I think this would be a good time to let you all know that we also have an MD PhD student, Chris Medeiros from the University of Florida, who is also here to answer any questions from the student point of view. Chris is a Florida native who has joined us at the University of Florida from further down south. He's in his second year of medical school, so he's thinking about, or is probably already, I don't know if you've already chosen your PhD group, but yeah, so he would be a great student resource.
Great, thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists. We are now going to move on to the Q&A portion of the session. So please, if you have additional questions, put them in the Q&A. Just a reminder that there will be a recording available approximately 24 hours from now on the virtual fair platform if you missed any of the beginning or need to leave early. We will start with a question that was submitted with the online registrations, and I think this applies to most of our panelists. If I am not accepted into the combined degree program, am I able to apply to the MD only program? And is that school specific, or is that kind of combined degree program type specific? Dr. Frasso, why don't you start us off?
Okay. So at Thomas Jefferson, you apply to medical school, and then once you're here, you apply to do the MPH step out year. If you're already a medical student somewhere else and you want to come to Thomas Jefferson, then you have an abbreviated application to the MPH program because you've already sort of crossed a pretty big threshold to get into medical school. So we've lowered some of the barriers for application. If you apply to the medical school and you don't get in, we do have a lot of students that do an accelerated MPH and then reapply to medical school. That's a very common pathway. We work closely with those students. We only accept you into the accelerated MPH program with the destination of medical school if you've got the goods to get into med school, because we don't want you to think that this is a back door. So we work very closely with those students to make sure they have a pathway into medicine. If they've got the numbers, it just wasn't their year, then we work with them to build up their application and prepare them to reapply.
Right. So for MD PhD programs, you apply both to the MD and an MD PhD program. Sometimes it's you apply to the medical school and you check off the MD PhD box. The admission to MD PhD program is really mostly driven by the medical school, as opposed to you applying to the PhD and then kind of applying to the MD through that. You can apply to both. Getting into the MD PhD program basically means you've gotten into the MD program, but you don't have to choose one or the other.
Particularly for the BS-MD program, because students are applying their second year of undergrad, these are typically applicants who've not yet applied to the MD program. So essentially, as mentioned in the slide, you would apply to the BS-MD program if you are admitted into that program. That is sort of your pathway into medical school. Of course, there are some formal application material that you will need to complete during the in reference to the AAMC application, but outside of that, excuse me, not in the AAMC application, the AMCAS application that you need to complete. But outside of that, you're actually pretty much done with your application as it concerns. Now, if you are not admitted into the BS-MD program, I will say that you can still independently apply to the MD program at your targeted time. And I will also note that some of our most successful MD applicants are actually applicants who've applied to the medical honors program or the combined BS-MD program.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to our next question, which is, what would your advice be to someone who wants to go into an MD PhD program, but is hesitant because of how long it would take?
I mean, I think this really applies to any dual degree program, with the exception, I guess, of the bachelor's. Really, the question is, what is your end goal? So if your end goal in terms of research as a measurable thing is getting an independent NIH grant, then it takes the same amount of time on average for an MD PhD to get an independent NIH grant and an MD who does research after MD training. So by and large, the time is not very different. It's just, where are you getting your science training? Are you getting it during your MD? Or are you getting it after finishing your medical school and or during residency or after residency? There are different arguments to be made either way, and I think it's all based on your individual preference. But when you think about it, it's a little bit more difficult once you have gotten your MD and your residency, and you have the clinical load of doing the clinical work that really can't be just put off or interrupted to then do research. It's more difficult then than it is while you're a student, while you're in training, to go and do PhD training. So I wouldn't necessarily think of it as one taking much longer. I would just think of, where do you want to do your scientific training?
And I can also add to that specific question, because I'm kind of in the beginning of that long stretch of road now. And that's something I struggled with personally, like when I was deciding whether or not to apply. And it boils down to something Dr. Zarenbar presented in his PowerPoint. It has to do with like the time stretch between like becoming a physician scientist, whether you take the MD route or the MD PhD route. And it was that like postdoc experience that you need following graduating with the degree. I figured I would benefit more from doing it, like Dr. Zarenbar just said, through the organized and structured program, and getting it right now as a student versus going back to doing getting more research experience and getting more certifications after that.
Great, thanks. we're going to do one more question since we're on MD PhD, and then we'll move on to maybe a different topic. But the next question, and this is also for you, Chris, I think Dr. Zermpar, you could maybe answer this a little bit as well. But what made you want to pursue an MD PhD? And then what did you find to be the most challenging part of the application process?
So for me, deciding to do the MD PhD actually happened kind of late, which did make it a challenge going forward. And I think it was the hardest part of pursuing the dual degree. Is I got into research kind of late. Like I said, I got into it in my junior year because it was part of my undergrad degree requirement. And then I ended up finding out that like during that experience that I actually really loved research and thinking about how I could apply it clinically and translating the findings that I was finding in the lab and how I could see that affecting patients down the road. But because I found out that I liked research so late, and a big part of the MD PhD is having that dedication to research and showing that you're capable of and you have that experience that you could contribute to a program. I did have to take an extra gap year to kind of fill in that like space and make myself more well-rounded as an applicant. And that was probably one of the bigger challenges. They're the biggest challenge for me. And then because of the specific research that I'm into or interested in, being basic research and translational research, the clinical research is can be handled by a physician, I feel, but the basic science component and aspects that I'm interested in particularly, I feel like going for that PhD would have contributed a lot more to my career goals down the line. And that kind of combination is why I ended up going for the PhD.
Yeah, I mean, just very briefly, I think the biggest challenge to being an MD PhD is finding your home, and finding where you feel comfortable, kind of the space you're comfortable inhabiting. Some people like being the expert scientists in a room of clinicians, but not being the expert clinician. And some people hate not being the expert clinician, even though they spend a lot of their time doing research. So, and the same thing in inverse. So I think you really have to find your level of comfort as to where you are with your expertise. I love it because I get to sort of think about problems from a different angle, whether it's on the research side or on the clinical side. And I don't necessarily have to, choose to, inhabit one space or the other entirely. I can inhabit either one of the spaces depending on how I'm feeling that day or how work is going.
Thank you. Our next question is applying to a dual degree program, I think all of the types of programs that we talked about, more competitive than applying to just a regular MD only program?
So that's a good question. If you're already in medical school, you have to be really in a strong position and doing exceedingly well to apply to that second degree. We don't want to set up any situations where you're not going to get the most out of your medical training because you're distracted by an additional degree. At Jefferson, it's not more competitive to apply to the dual degree. We're really supportive of folks combining their training. I would say in some places that might be the case, but and if one doesn't get into one program or the other, they have the opportunity to kind of pursue the degree they get into and then work towards the other if they choose to.
Particularly for the BS-MD program, admissions does seem to be a little bit more competitive. That is simply because there is a cohort of only about 10, sometimes 8 to 12 students that are accepted. We've traditionally been landing at about 10 applicants per year. And so that is a more competitive process. Now, this class does actually matriculate into the larger med school class where, there's about 5,000 applicants that are applying traditionally with 135 being accepted. And so I guess it kind of depends on what your sense of competitiveness. But for the BS-MD program at the University of Florida, just keep in mind there are about only 8 to 12 students that selected each year based on the seminar and curriculum that we do try to create for our students.
Yeah, I think by the sheer fact that there are fewer spots in these combined programs, it has to be more competitive, right? The flip side is, though, that not everyone applies to these things. So the applicant pool is also smaller. So is it more competitive? Probably. But I think really what it comes down to is you have to make the argument that this spot is for you. and that you're the right person for it, and it is the right thing for you. And I think that's really, if it's not a good fit, it's going to be hard to convince someone that it's the good match.
Right. So the
There's
next
a question in the chat about whether a PhD dissertation, what's the difference between that and a master's thesis? And I think that's such a good question. And I answered and then realized, Ali, you might want to pipe in, but I think the lift is different. A master's thesis, for the most part, we're looking for sort of one publishable paper at the end. Having done a PhD, that was not the goal. It was maybe 5 times that. So it depends on the nature of the PhD program, but a master's thesis and a PhD dissertation are definitely, one takes far longer than the other. Would you agree?
Absolutely. So I like to think of a PhD as adding a substantial body of new knowledge to what is known in the world. So you have to be creating something new. You have to be discovering something new. And that, that's not usually something that, you can put on a timeline. It's not just a matter of taking classes and making sure that you get your grades and then, kind of and writing a thesis where you summarize what you've learned or maybe synthesize what you've learned. You really have to be creating something new. And the bar is certainly different.
Yeah. And the time investment is different for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
You maybe following up on that, speak a bit to, I saw threads of this question coming up, kind of what the career possibilities or career outcomes might look like from someone who does, MD only versus maybe an MD MPH dual degree versus maybe a MD PhD dual degree.
I can start with that one. I mean, most of our students all of their students, I don't think there's an exception to this, go on and do residency. And their residency journey is very similar to those that, did the traditional MD. It's just that they tend to get more involved in research opportunities during their residency journey. So I stay in touch with a fair number of our graduates and often provide sort of research and consultation guidance because they're often the only person in the residency program that knows how to run statistical analyses using software, using R, using Stata, using SPSS. So they go to that residency with a different skill set and get involved in work sort of beyond the scope of the clinical path. But after residency, their career trajectory can vary a little bit, moving into leadership roles, into maybe medical education. That's a very popular path for folks that do an MPH, being involved in med ed, being involved in the community in a way, having a footprint that's both clinical and advocacy, clinical and research, clinical and sort of the social justice lens.
And one thing I tell folks with any kind of dual degree program is the more training you do, the less qualified you become to do everything. But really, what the extra degrees do is it gives you a stamp. It gives you sort of a badge to say, I am serious about this thing. Look at me, I've done work in this thing, and so this is what I want to do, and you should believe me when I tell you I want to do this. I've done a PhD. I know what it means to do research. And so I want to do research, let me do research, or hire me for this research position. It's a little bit harder to convince folks if you've done an MD without having done a PhD, or you'd have to put in the work and really do the work to convince people that you are serious about whatever it is that you say you're going to do. The PhDs and the MPHs kind of give you that badge or that sort of verification that you can do what it is that you're saying you're going to do.
Yes, thank you. How about can international students apply to the BS-MD program? And then I think also extending that to the other programs as well would be helpful.
That's a great question. I won't be able to speak to BSMD programs at large, but what I can speak to is the admissions process here at the University of Florida College of Medicine. And so because these students will actually matriculate into our full MD program, so this actually will also overlap with the MD PhD program. Students must be a United States citizen or in possession of a green card in order to successfully be admitted into these programs.
That is what I'm bound by too. Although some of it is also limitations of how the programs, the MD PhD programs are funded, right? It's federal funding, and so they are limited.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this one as well. I'm at Vanderbilt University, and we are a private medical school, and we are able to take international students into our MD and MD PhD programs, just less than perhaps we have usually less of them than we have U.S. citizens, but we do have them. So that's definitely going to be program dependent, I believe. And then another question we just kind of mentioned funding briefly. Are most combined degree programs fully funded, or might there be unique financial aid opportunities available specifically for these types of combined degree programs?
For an MPH, it depends. We try really hard to lower the financial burden because you already have enough debt from getting your MD. And my secret passion is to take over medicine with public health people. So we really try to make it financially feasible for folks. There are some special grants out there for people that want to do public health training during medicine. The United States Public Health Service provides sort of support and recognition for people that do that. So it really depends on where you're looking, where you go, and what the opportunities are. But we provide a pretty significant scholarship to the dual degree students from our own medical school and those that come to us from elsewhere.
Yeah, MD PhD programs are variable. By and large, they are fully funded, in that you will not only get your tuition paid for, but also you will get a stipend on top of that. There are programs that will admit you to the MD PhD program per se, but not give you tuition break or a stipend except for your PhD years. And so, again, you have to be very cognizant of what specific program or what specific slot within that program you're in. Something to discuss. But for the most part, MD PhD programs funded plus a stipend.
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go for it.
I was just going to add for the BSMD program, funding is very unique because many of both your MHP year as well as your first year of medical school, you're actually still considered an undergraduate student. So many students are able to use things like prepaid college services, Bright Futures if you're a student in the state of Florida. So a lot of the undergraduate funding that you get still is able to be applied to both your medical honors year as well as your first year medical school. Beyond that, you are looked at for and evaluated for scholarships, just like the rest of our UFCOM students or College of Medicine students.
Great, thank you. Our next question, I think this is a great one for our student, Chris. What is one thing that students say they wish they knew before pursuing a combined degree program?
I honestly wish I had a better answer for you, but I think one thing that we've all been figuring out is like what classes to take, and the fact that we do have to take some extra classes during the PhD is something that we found out like fairly recently. And I don't know if I'm disheartened. I'm kind of a little bit excited and a little bit, I don't know, upset about it, but I'm actually not. I'm really looking forward to it.
I think one thing that the MD and PhD students are always surprised by is they have to know how to write. And I think as folks are preparing for medical school, they're really focused on those sort of hard science skills. And then they get to public health school and it's like, oh, you have to put words together into these things called sentences, and those have to go together. So I think that learning how to write scientifically is a huge benefit of getting a dual degree of any kind, and will pay off for years to come. But that's a big shift for a lot of students who've been pre-med and focusing on medicine for a long time.
I mean, that's true for academic medicine in general, right? That's that's your bread and butter, is being able to put your thoughts on paper and convincing other people.
Yeah, and I think it gives you a chance to use those muscles again, because it's been a minute, for most of the medical students that come my way.
Are there any unique residencies that an MD MPH program could help you get into? And then I think maybe after Dr. Frasso answers that, we could expand that into kind of what residency post MD PhD program, what unique options might exist there as well.
I have to say, there used to be sort of a misunderstanding that the MD MPH was really for those headed into primary care, and that's not the case at all. We're sending people to ophthalmology, to surgery, to rheumatology, to across the board, because health equity is a huge piece of this work, and there's no discipline and no residency pathway where having an ability to appreciate health equity and deal with disparities and address the social determinants of health doesn't have a benefit. So it has been, by and large, across the board in things that you wouldn't have seen 20 years ago, has real strong appeal. There's lots of good papers out there about why it matters, and this population health and public health lens, and how it helps you navigate your training and make a difference in the space.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, similar. I wouldn't say there's anything that the MD PhD program uniquely allows you to do or disallows you from doing. You can do anything. You can be a surgeon or a pathologist and anything in between, or a neurosurgeon, right? So, there was a question, I think, somewhere in the Q&A, is that can you do a long training program and still be, a neurosurgeon? First of all, neurosurgery residency training is really not that much longer than general surgery or vascular surgery. So, I think that academic, we're talking about long residency programs. So academic surgery training programs are by and large around the same period of time, 6-7 years. So if anything, if I'm an example, I was in a 7-year residency training program. 2 of those years were built in research. And since I'd done a PhD, I was able to convince my program not to, force me to do 2 years of research, because there was really nothing I was going to learn during that time. So it took me a shorter period of time to do the residency, which just meant that I got to go into the lab after my residency training earlier. So, and in fact, some people would say there are residency programs or fields where a PhD is actually very helpful in terms of understanding just the medicine, right? So it's not just, a lot of fields are getting more and more complicated and technical, and the more sort of basic science translational research you've done, the more capable you are being at the cutting edge clinically. For example, neurosurgery, transplant surgery, genetics, I think neurology, a lot of these fields, to be really at the cutting edge of an academic clinician's world, a lot of people benefit from actually having done a basic translational work. So, certainly plenty of people, most people do it without a PhD or without advanced, other training, but certainly doesn't prevent you from doing that.
I'll just add quickly with effort of time, that research I hear is a common theme among all of our programs. And I think that from students, one of the things that I hear is that it's a big determinant when applying to residency in general, with step 1 being pass fail now. And so being able to conduct research and to do so well, and be able to, as both of our panelists have said, to be able to conduct research well and be able to talk and articulate what you've done will be a big determining factor on the road to residency.
All right, thank you. I think we've got time for one final question. And so I am going to have each of our panelists maybe share just kind of one piece of information or final piece of advice or takeaway for students that might be on the fence about kind of deciding between your individual type of combined degree program and MD only. And I'd love to have Chris answer this one as well as all of our panelists.
I can go first. Piece of advice is you really have to enjoy what you're doing at the moment. Life goes on and life continues to go on. And if you're only waiting for what happens at the end of all this training, you're really not giving yourself enough sort of a benefit in the meanwhile, right? If you're not enjoying the journey, you're not going to enjoy the destination. So if you love doing research, take the time to do research. If you don't want to do research, but you want to, I don't know, get into whatever you think you need to get into because that extra label is going to make you more competitive, it's not worth it.
Yeah. I would say you don't do it to be more competitive. Do it because you have a passion for it and you want to have a nimble career that will give you a little bit of ways to pivot professionally. Careers are long, and being able to imagine yourself in different roles with dual training can be really helpful. Students often ask like, oh, it's going to add another year. When I'm done, I'm going to be 27 or something. And you're going to be 27 anyway. So spend the time doing what you want to do. Someone said that to me once when I was getting my PhD. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be so old when I finish it. She said, you're going to be old anyway. You might as well have a PhD. And I was like, oh, an epiphany. So I think that, it's a time investment, but your career and life is long. And these careers are challenging and dynamic, and it gives you a little more opportunity to be nimble. And I think really make a difference beyond the scope of that individual patient. I think some of these skills allow you to do work that's more generalizable, has a broader impact. And if that's what appeals to you, then dual training is a great pathway.
I'll just quickly wrap up and say to anyone who's thinking about the BSMD program or just MD in general, when you're thinking about these programs, understand kind of what your personal mission is and how your mission aligns with the program's mission, and so mission alignment between applicants and program make for the best applicants. And so ensure kind of what your long-term goals, your med school or your program can actually meet those objectives and helping you accomplish that. Applicants have a lot more power in this process than they think. And so I encourage them to really look at that and understand their mission and what they're wanting and their why.
I think for me, but the biggest piece of advice I can give, something I wish I would have done when I was in undergrad, was to find an MD PhD mentor. Because at the time when I was deciding what degree path I wanted to go to, because like I said, I really like research and I really like medicine. I didn't know how to manage those two very the passions of mine. And I started finding out about the MD PhD. I think having spoken to someone who did have a dual degree would have really helped me iron out my plan and really bring it together. Because I spent a lot of time figuring out by myself and kind of reading up on websites and see and research papers and what I thought would be the best path for me. And I ended up picking the right one. I really enjoy where I'm at. I love UF. I love the fact that I'm in an MD PhD program. But like I said, having been in undergrad, I'll give you a little chomp for that. Having had spoken to someone with an MD PhD would have really helped a lot. And then one final thing, is there any way I can share my email in case anyone has any questions about an MD PhD program in the future, in the chat or somewhere?
Yes, I think if you just
Okay.
go to everyone.
Okay.
All right.
I'm gonna say it out loud really quick. It's C Medeiros, like my first initial, my last name, at ufl.edu. I don't know if you guys can see the chat, but I'll put it there too.
Thank you, Chris. We'll copy that in there for everyone. Thank you so much, everyone. I think we're out of time, actually overtime a few minutes. So thank you to all of our panelists and to Chris, our student, for joining. Just a reminder that this recording is going to be available 24 hours from now. And there were far too many questions that we could get to today. So also please join at the virtual fair tomorrow and ask all of your remaining questions. Ask individual schools the questions that you have about the programs that they offer and how they might be unique at their individual schools. So thank you all for joining, all of our panelists and our attendees alike.
Are we good? Are we leaving?